Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Stephanie Woods. I am the program manager with the Coastal Douglas Fir Conservation Partnership, otherwise known as the CDFCP. I'm joined today by my colleagues Dionne Bunsha from UBC Botanical Gardens, Marian McCoy, and Kelly Chapman. Before we get started, I just wanted to do a land and water acknowledgement. And firstly, it's important to acknowledge the colonialist roots of the field of conservation and the impacts that it's had on Indigenous peoples. With respect, I acknowledge that the Action for Adaptation project geographical area spans over the traditional and unceded territories of many Coast Salish nations. I expressed gratitude for their enduring stewardship and acknowledge the ongoing impacts of colonialization. Personally, I live and work in community on the unceded territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees Esquimalt nations, as well as the Wasanich peoples. I'll pass it back over to you, Lynn.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And yeah, if you just joined, please feel free to share who you are and where you're phoning from, including your traditional territory. That'd be great. So yes, we have a full hour today. So it's going to be, I think there's a good show up of folks, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more about what Action for Adaptation team has been working on. Our first speaker is Stephanie, who is just speaking. So Stephanie Woods is the project manager of the Coastal Douglas Fir Conservation Partnership, where she works to protect some of BC's most threatened ecosystems. Next, we have Kelly Chapman, who is an ecologist and environmental planner with over 30 years of experience working with government, First Nations, and NGOs in biodiversity conservation. Dionne Bunsha is a climate and conservation engagement coordinator at the UBC Botanical Gardens, and she leads a climate action or adaptation project aiming at bringing communities and networks together. And then finally, last but not least, we have Marian McCoy, who's an ecologist and former professional agrologist and policy analyst with the province, and she has more than 18 years of experience working with all levels of government, First Nations, and NGOs. So that was quick. If you want more information on their bios, you can look at their webpage. There's a lot of speakers today. And so I'll hand over. So Stephanie is going to kick us off with the first presentation. Thanks, Stephanie.
You're welcome. So as Lynn mentioned, the Action for Adaptation project is a collaboration between UBC Botanical Gardens and the Coastal Douglas Fir Conservation Partnership. And we'd like to thank our funders, Environment and Climate Change Canada, as well as a private donor from UBC Botanical Garden. You can click to the next slide there, Kelly. Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you. So the purpose for Action for Adaptation includes creating a website, and this website will integrate the Atlas and have a policy toolkit. It supports actions for climate adaptation and biodiversity conservation by developing decision-making and policy tools for local governments and First Nations on BC's southwest coast. So the actual Biodiversity Atlas is a single accessible online platform created by researchers and peer-reviewed by the province and experts. It includes mapping layers that local governments and First Nations have requested since 2022 to support informed decision-making. The policy tools are also included, and this is what Marian will dive more deeply into. And these are resources designed to help planners use the Atlas to advance climate adaptation and biodiversity conservation. The purpose of today's talk is to walk you through these data-driven mapping layers. So Kelly will dive deeply into that and then focus on how it applies to making policy change. You can switch to the next one there, Kelly. Thank you. So the study area includes the CDFCP boundary, which includes the Coastal Douglas Fir CDFMM biogeoclimatic zone and the coastal Western Hemlock very dry maritime biogeoclimatic subzones. Portions of the other coastal Western Hemlock variants are also included, but beyond the CDFCP boundary, this project area also includes the upland watersheds and as you can see right here, we've divided it into four regions. It's the Strathcona study area, the Sunshine Coast area, Vancouver and Gulf Island study area, as well as the Lower Mainland study area. Uh, and now Kelly is going to walk you through the history of the mapping project and the layers that have been developed. And then Dionne is going to walk you through the website that we're working on behind the scenes that'll showcase both the atlas and the toolkit. And then Marian will talk to you about the intricacies of the toolkit. So passing it off to Kelly now. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm going to, unfortunately, because of the time we have, this is going to be a pretty quick overview. But in summary, for this online atlas, we're working on the following layers that we aim to have uploaded onto the atlas by March 2026. These will be beta draft layers for review. We're expecting to have ongoing continuous improvement of them. And we're hoping folks will log on and have a look and give us their feedback. So the layers that will be uploaded will include land cover at a 3-meter resolution, forest base carbon biomass, 15-meter resolution, tree canopy models, a aggregated disturbance map, a map of sensitive ecosystems, which includes new high resolution, old and big tree mapping, and some aggregated riparian and wetland mapping, potential ecosystems at risk, climate mycorefugia, which is might be a new concept for many folks, hydrologically sensitive areas, mapping for species at risk, and then once we have all these layers completed, we'll be using them to develop some ecosystem connectivity mapping next fiscal. So the first one, just to give you a peek, this is our 3-meter land cover layer that was developed by Dr. Aaron Crockett with currently at UMBC. It's derived from LiDAR and satellite data. The map you're seeing has 18 land cover classes, but we're having that reduced to 9 land cover classes to reduce some of the area we found in it. It's much higher resolution and more up to date, for example, than the National Land Cover of Canada, which is widely available, which is from 2020 and 30-meter resolution. And what we're hoping this can be used for is tracking and reporting on change and losses of natural ecosystems, which will assist us with carbon reporting related to losses of forest cover, mapping ecosystem connectivity, and to help local governments and others plan for growth and development. This is just a close-up view to see what it looks like. This is actually the Powell River area. The next major theme that we're working on is we're trying to develop an aggregated disturbance layer. We have a number of people working on this, including Levi Oostenbrink and Sasha Nazarova from the BC government, as well as David Leversey. So what we found is that the disturbance mapping that's widely publicly available doesn't do a great job for local level planning. Some layers do good jobs for some things and not others. And so we're trying to pull together various data sources to get the best possible single layer of disturbance. We're also updating it to 2025 using the 3-meter land cover layer, consolidated cut block layer, some updated VRI data, also using remote sensing and tree canopy models based on LiDAR and satellite. Yeah, and again, we're hoping to use this. We've got a lot of mapping layers in the area derived from terrestrial ecosystem mapping, some of the SEI mapping, et cetera, which is very out of date. And we're hoping we can use this as a mask to update some of these older layers. We've already started doing that. And it will also help us track land cover change for measuring carbon storage and forest cover. Our aim is to be able to break this down into temporary and permanent disturbance, which will help with carbon reporting, and it will also be a major input for the ecosystem connectivity mapping we're planning to do next year. And this is just a close-up of how this looks with the yellow being cut blocks, the black being urban roads and industrial and infrastructure, and the orangey red colors being cropland and pasture and clearings. And this is the sea shelf area. This is just to give you an idea, a bit of background. This is showing the red squares show where we currently have publicly available LiDAR coverage for our study area. Some of it's as old as 2016, and I think it goes up to 2019 at the moment. And where we have LiDAR, we can get very highly accurate forest cover mapping. But you can see there's big chunks missing, particularly on the east side of Vancouver Island, the private managed forest land, parts of the Cathet Regional District, and Metro Van and Fraser Valley. So what we did is we engaged a gentleman named Luismar de Assis Berros from UMBC. He's a PhD student, and he has come up with a methodology which basically fuses LiDAR and satellite imagery using artificial intelligence and deep learning. And what he does is he uses LiDAR to get highly accurate forest cover and forest height mapping, and then uses the AI to extrapolate that to the areas where there is no LiDAR coverage. So this is a forest cover map that he's generated for us, and you can see it comes from LiDAR and satellite imagery, and you can see that it covers our entire study area, not just the areas where there's LiDAR coverage. His work is looking like it's roughly 76% accurate in areas without LiDAR, which is higher than most of the other global models, or all of the other global models that are out there for tree canopy modeling. And the reason we did this is the existing forest cover mapping, whether it's the vegetation resource inventory or terrestrial ecosystem mapping, typically at 1 to 20,000, so pretty low resolution. And it's not up to date. And in case of the Thames, some of that's as old as 1996. So we've run this. Luismar then used some fancy satellite imagery methods, and he's now updated this forest cover map is up to date to 2025, and it's very accurate. So again, we'll be using this to track losses and change in forest cover. We'll use it in our connectivity and corridor mapping. We'll use it to help us update our older mapping from the TEM and the SEI, and also with disturbance mapping, because the inverse of this map tells us where there's no forest cover. So it's pretty accurate, helping us define where disturbance has occurred. And then we took Luismar's forest cover map that you just saw, and then we're working with David Leversey, who is an expert at working with forest cover data, put them together with Luismar, and what they've done is they've intersected an updated version of the VRI data set to basically add forest age information to Luismar's forest cover map. So what you see here is a high resolution 10 meter, based on 10 meter pixels forest cover map showing forest age. And right here, you're looking at all old forests greater than 140 years of age. If we change that threshold to 250, there'd be a lot less, but this shows us where most of the important old forest is. And this is much more accurate than any other data we currently have for the study area, and it will be useful for identifying remaining old and ancient forests, because we know ancient forests are really important for sensitive ecosystem mapping, et cetera. Important climate mycorefugia, because old forests are a number of degrees cooler than secondary forest or previously logged forest. Also, it's really important habitat for species at risk, and it's going to help us map at-risk ecological communities. And then we took this one step further, and this map is showing, and you can see the comparison between this map and that map. This is all old forest. This is old forest, which is also big. So what we did is we took the top 30% of biggest trees in each of the BEC zones for the entire study area, and we mapped them. And then we added the age class data. So you can see here that there's a lot, that most of the old we have remaining is not actually big tree old. These are typically the old growth that we have remaining is higher elevation, smaller tree forest on unproductive sites that mean it isn't of interest to logging companies. So these are extremely rare ecosystems on the coast, probably less than 1% in some 1 to 3% of what would have traditionally or historically been found on the landscape is left. So it's very important that we're able to accurately identify where these are, and now we can. And it's also really important habitat for species at risk like marbled murrelet, which need big old tree, big old growth forests, not just old growth. Um, And then we also we're generating a map, and this just shows big tree forest overall. So not just old, but any age class, because basically we've lost so much old growth and especially big tree old growth. It's really important to identify where also just the biggest tree mature secondary forest is, because in order to sort of bolster the health of our watersheds and our forests and our biodiversity, we need to identify mature forest that we can recruit into old growth. And this map, which is the tallest 30% forest within each BEC zone of all ages, will help us do that. And it's really important, as I said, for identifying high value recruitment forests as per the old growth strategic review and their priorities as priorities for restoration and conservation. Also really important, climate microrefuge, even if it's not old big tree, secondary forests are cooler sites than small tree forests. And again, important habitat for at-risk species who are having a difficult time actually finding old forest. And just to give you an idea what this looks like close up, this is the seashell area. This is a forest cover map of all forest ages derived from the provincial VRI mapping. And this is what our forest cover mapping looks like. So you can see that it's much higher resolution. It captures a lot more of the newer cut blocks. And we're hoping it will resolve. We heard one of the issues we heard from during our consultation with people working in local government is often the mapping they're using isn't very accurate, and it sort of undermines their credibility when they say, oh, there's an old forest here, and you go out and it's been clear cut or logged or cleared. And another close-up view. This shows big trees, the top 30% big trees by BEC zone that are in the seashell area. Everything from 30 meters and up in this case. And this shows old and ancient forest in the same area. And you can see that where we have old and ancient forest left and where you see most of that ancient forest there in the dark green, that's actually a provincial park. I remember tetrahedron. Anyways, and that's why there's still old forest there, but you can see that actually most of it is small tree, old forest. So these will be little scrappy trees that probably wouldn't be of interest for logging in any case. And then you can see that old and tall big trees, forest, there's a lot less of it. And so it's really important for us to identify where these are. The other theme that we're going to have on the Biodiversity Atlas is forest carbon. Again, Dr. Aaron Crockett at UNBC produced this for us. It's high resolution, 15 meters based on LiDAR and satellite imagery. It shows you the amount of carbon stored in forest biomass. So that's kilograms per pixel here. And it can be used to estimate carbon storage within large parcels, example, half a hectare and higher, and can help local governments and other planners identify high carbon density areas as priorities for conservation. And hopefully we can also use it as an input into carbon tracking and reporting tools, which we will also be developing next fiscal. And this just gives you an idea what the close-up view looks like. This is just all these maps in this presentation, by the way, are draft. We're still updating them. This data is 2016. We're updating it to 2025, so this will change in the final version. And then for our other themes, which we're collectively calling environmentally sensitive areas, including map themes for sensitive ecosystems, hydrologically sensitive areas, ecosystems at risk, and climate microrefugia. We're aggregating both some of the forest cover mapping that you just saw, plus other publicly available data sources, including, and you can see on this map, these are all the different 10 projects, terrestrial ecosystem mapping projects that have been undertaken in the study area. There's 59 of them, plus their sensitive ecosystem inventory. Some of them date back as far as 1996, so they're various resolutions, various dates, and we're aggregating and merging them into a single layer. And we've developed an extensive crosswalk table that allows us to put all these projects together and puts them into a common language. And just to give you an idea what that involves, so this is an example of the crosswalk table we've developed. So we basically merged 60 plus TEM and SEI projects. And within those projects, there's over 1,000 different map code combinations that we've identified in this crosswalk table. So you can see there's a map code. It correlates back to Newbeck for mapping nerds. And then we've also identified whether there's any red or blue listed plant communities associated with that map code, whether it also serves as a climate refuge. And we've given it, where relevant, a sensitive ecosystem class and subclass. And this is crosswalk is sort of the foundation of how we've generated the maps you're going to see in the next slides. So as an example, for sensitive ecosystems, and for those who aren't familiar, sensitive ecosystems are those which are considered rare or fragile, home to many species at risk, sensitive to disturbance. The province has generated sensitive ecosystem mapping for various parts of our study area. And what we're showing here on the left is an example of the Sunshine Coast SEI, clipped to the Sunshine Coast Regional District. It's quite out of date, 2005, and you can see that its coverage is limited to near coast areas. So it's out of date and it's got limited coverage, versus the map on the right is our new mapping, which you can see extends to the whole regional district area. And we've also removed recently and developed and logged areas from the mapping. So again, for example, this is a close-up of the Sunshine Coast SEI that the province did in 2005. And the reason why sensitive ecosystem mapping is important, because under Section 473, the Local Government Act, it means that official community plans done by local governments may include environmentally sensitive areas, development permit areas for ecosystem protection, and other policies for habitat protection. So knowing where these sensitive ecosystems is important for local government. But what we've heard is local governments using these old maps, often they're inaccurate or out of date because they were produced so long ago. And the other problem with some of the sensitive ecosystem mapping is it doesn't fully align with the objectives of the Old Growth Strategic Review, in that it doesn't pull out big tree old growth and ancient old growth, which are also important ecosystems. So this is the Sunshine Coast SEI, and this is our sensitive ecosystem mapping that we pulled together from these aggregated sources. So you can see that it extends much further, and in fact, it will extend to most of our study area. The reason why I'm only showing parts of the Sunshine Coast is we're still building those maps right now outside of the Sunshine Coast. And we've also removed all the recently developed and logged forest using Louise Marr's forest cover map, so it's much more up to date.
Kelly, sorry to interrupt. I just want to do a quick check-in on how you're doing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, it's okay. I
Where
don't want to
are we
rush
with
you. This
time?
is really important. I just wanted to see how.
Okay, I'll move a little faster.
Okay.
So we're also using this mapping to extend ecosystems at risk mapping. So the map on the left, this is the BC Conservation Data Center mapping for ecosystems at risk. And out of 95 possible ecosystems at risk that are likely to occur in the SCRD, they have only so far mapped 19. Whereas on the right, you can see we've actually mapped 59 out of 95 possible. So the benefit here is the CDC mapping, although it's high quality mapping, it gives you the impression that there's a lot less coverage of ecosystems at risk in this study area than there actually is. So that's what our map does on the other side. We're also mapping, I mapped them as hydrologically sensitive areas. So basically, we're just focusing on ecosystems which are important for water and aquatic health, so lakes, wetlands, riparian areas, so that local governments or people who are just interested in watershed planning or identifying priorities related to water, they can just hone in on this mapping theme. And we're also mapping something which is new, but which is important in the age of climate change, which is climate microrefugia. These are basically ecosystems that will stay cooler and moister. They're cooler and moister than other surrounding ecosystems, and as a result, they'll persist longer on the landscape. So it's really important to identify these ecosystems and factor them into particularly connectivity, ecological connectivity and corridor mapping. And again, we have a whole literature review on this: riparian areas, floodplains, streams, rivers, wetlands, moist forest, cedar leading typically, old forest, ancient high elevation forest, particularly important, mature forest with big trees, and other things like rocky talus. So that's me. So thank you. And I'll hand it over to Dionne.
Hello everyone. I'm just gonna go through our website that's under development and will be online in March next year. So Kelly, can you go? The main website this is sorry, go back one second. The website has a few main tabs. One will be for the atlas, as you can see at the top there. The other will have the policy toolkit, which Marian will talk about in greater depth later. And then there's a tab called adaptation, which will basically contain reports that interpret what the mapping is telling us and highlight opportunities for conservation of the ecosystems that are important. And then we have a tab called examples that kind of highlights interesting restoration projects for nature-based solutions in our region and BC. And this is just to kind of serve as inspiration for people because they're very innovative kind of ways to address the problems that are in the region. Kelly, can you go to the next slide? So the atlas is still under development, so I'm not going to explore that tab, and you've seen a lot of it from what Kelly has already shown you. But what we're going to do is take the report that Marian has written and kind of break it up into smaller pieces in the policy toolkit section. So it's easier to navigate, and you can kind of hone in on where the things that you're working on. So if you're working on an OCP, you can kind of just look at that section. And so the policy, the land stewardship and policy builder toolkit is basically divided into two sections, one for First Nations and one for local governments. Kelly, can you go to the next slide? And there's also a section that helps people understand the ecological value of atlas layers so that you can link them into policy and even include that language in policy so that people get a better sense of why we're focusing on these values in the ecosystem. And Kelly, can you go to the next slide, please? So this is what the First Nations Land Stewardship Toolkit looks like, and it just provides examples of innovative ways in which First Nations have kind of used the current governance framework to steward their lands. And it includes things like IPCAs and land code, as well as co-governance agreements and frameworks. Kelly, can you go to the next slide, please? And then this is the local government policy toolkit, and it highlights existing federal, provincial, and local government legislation that planners can use to kind of protect ecosystems that are important. And we've often heard from planners that they feel like local governments don't have mechanisms like policy mechanisms or legal ways to conserve ecosystems. So this section highlights several options that exist, and they've been compiled by Marian. And it's quite extensive. So you can see you have federal, provincial, as well as local government provisions that could be used. Kelly, can we go to the next slide, please? And this is, again, work done by Marian that kind of has reviewed a lot of plans that already exist within local government and kind of connecting the atlas layers to policy language and provisions that planners can incorporate into your planning documents. So it gives you kind of policy language that you can use and how that could be linked to the mapping that's been done. And Kelly, the next slide. Thanks. And this is just shows you the examples page that highlights various restoration projects underway, and they're kind of classified into various ecosystem types, so coastal, forest, riparian, or wetland, and kind of provides inspiration of great projects underway in the region. And the next slide. That's basically a little run through of what's behind the scenes in the website. And I'm going to hand it over to Marian to talk more about the policy toolkit that she's written.
Thank you so much to all three of you. We didn't get a chance to clap in between, but there's a lot there. And I think people are definitely going to have some follow-up questions. If you could just hold on, or you can type your questions in the chat while we're handing over to Marian, and we'll answer those as much as we can at the end of Marian's presentation. Over to you, Marian.
Okay, thanks, Lynn and Dionne and everybody. Now comes the driest and least visually interesting portion of our presentation this morning. I'm going to walk through the actual document that is the resource, the basis of the information that Dionne just ran through and showed you on the website. And from my perspective, it's really cool to see the actual atlas and the website coming together, because I've been mired in the text and the reading portion of stuff. So I'm just going to share my screen. And can everybody see that? Great. Okay, thanks. So today, what I'm going to run through briefly is the purpose of the toolkit, the structure, the research approach that I took, the main information sources, and then I'm going to talk briefly about the two main sections, one of which is the land stewardship toolkit for First Nations, and then the local government policy toolkit. So, and Dionne sort of touched on this. The purpose of the toolkit is really to provide planners and land stewards with information that they can use to through their policy to achieve their biodiversity goals and really leverage the information that's provided in the atlas and in the web page. So I want to merely iterate that the policy toolkit itself is not intended to be legal information. It's not legally vetted. It's not legal advice, but it is here as information. So the structure of the actual toolkit, which I'm going to show you in a moment, it's 150 pages. A lot of that is appendices at the back end and divided into three parts. The first part is sort of the background and methods description. Part 2 is the First Nations land stewardship toolkit. And part 3 then is the local government policy toolkit. And then the key tables and appendices are listed here on the slide there, and we'll quickly take a look at them if there's time. So the research approach I took is the Action for Adaptation team had already carried out a number of interviews and workshops with planners and similar folks before I joined the team. So I mined that information. They were really looking to find out what would be of most use in the atlas, but a lot of policy related information came out of that. So I mined those interviews. And then I did, of course, a lot of online research of publications and webinars. And from that, I started to build an inventory of land stewardship tools of use to First Nations. And then I started to build an inventory of official community plans, various governments, local governments in the study area have already put together. strategies like biodiversity strategies and bylaws that pertain to the values that we've been looking at in the Atlas. And then from there, I also built a summary of the existing legislation, both federal and provincial. And Dionne sort of showed you that in the website. And this is also compiled in Appendix B of the actual toolkit. And then I also did some interviews. I've spoken with some of you, mainly planners and land stewards, to find out what's working now. What tools are you using? If something isn't working, why isn't it? How can policy be adopted or adapted to be more effective? And I did the First Nations toolkit separately because it became apparent really quickly that it's not our place to say, here's what you should be saying in your policy. So I just put together an analysis of the various tools that are available to First Nations to support them in their land stewardship, land management actions. So primary information sources for the First Nations component, I drew largely from the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, and then the Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas Knowledge Basket website, which is a wealth of information. And then I drew really heavily from the Green Bylaws Toolkit, which many of you are familiar with, and also Develop with Care, which is the important provincial document. And while I drew heavily from those two sources, this policy toolkit is a bit different in that it leans less on the legal aspects and a bit more on the pragmatic, here's what you can say in your policy. But I want to acknowledge the Green Bylaws Toolkit was a huge source of information. So I also drew from a document called the Regulatory Mechanisms Toolkit, which was put together by the Action on Climate team at SFU. They kind of did a high-level version of the policy toolkit, and it's really helpful. But this toolkit goes into a lot more detail. And then, of course, looked at a lot of federal and provincial legislation and local government policies and bylaws. So let's look now at the First Nations toolkit portion. There are several tools available and currently in use in various forms by First Nations throughout the project area, and we're going to look at those. And these can apply on reserve as well as in traditional territories, depending on what they are. And they each offer benefits and trade-offs, which I've gone into detail discussing this in the policy toolkit, and we won't have time to go through today. And they all vary in degrees of effectiveness depending on the objectives of the First Nation community. And it's really the individual communities that are best to determine which tools best suit their needs for their situation. So the tools that are explored in the toolkit are land codes, tribal parks, also known as IPCAs, forest resource plans, collaborative tables, and so on. And you'll see this arrow I've got on the left-hand side, and this is in doing the research and talking with people. I've kind of got these in order of most effective in terms of protection and autonomy to more or less least protected or effective. And this is sort of my opinion. Folks who are involved in using some of these tools might feel differently. It really depends on the situation, but things like key biodiversity areas and biosphere regions, they don't really offer autonomy. They are tools that can help with managing biodiversity and land resources, but they're not necessarily as autonomous as a land code or an IPCA is for First Nations. So a couple of examples, let's look at the land code. So it's a way for First Nations to independently manage their reserve lands and resources. And as I mentioned, I think they offer the greatest autonomy of the tools, but they can only apply to reserve land. So there are two main formal steps in approaching a land code, and the first is to become a signatory to the Framework Agreement on First Nation Land Management. That's a federally developed document because this is really meant as a process to move away from the Indian Act provisions. And then the next step is to actually create the land code, and that is done with the community, within the community, and it's intended, as I said, to replace the provisions in the Indian Act. There are more than 50 land codes in effect in BC, and about 26% of those are in the project area, and these are listed in Appendix A of the policy toolkit. So tribal parks or IPCAs, it's important to note that Indigenous nations and communities or governments, they hold the inherent right to designate IPCAs in their territories. There's no permission required. They can go ahead and do it. They're owned and governed or co-governed by the Indigenous communities, and they're intended to reflect Indigenous laws and legal order. And they can be declared anywhere within the territory. They can be land, water, or a combination of both. They can include lands where there's already provincial or federal jurisdiction, like a provincial or federal park. And it's not necessary to collaborate with provincial or federal government to establish an IPCA. But they do exist in sort of a legal gray zone. And as of 2023, there's no specific legislation under Canadian law that acknowledges IPCAs. And a couple of examples that some of you are probably familiar with, which is the Great Bear IPCA. And then here in the study area, the Quant Marine Protected Area, which is Sayot First Nation, where I am coming to you from, established, I believe it was signed in 2024. So, okay, let's switch to part 3 now. This is the local government policy toolkit, and I'm gonna flip to the actual document and show you some examples from it. So as Dionne sort of described, it is intended to provide a policy information that links to the values that are mapped in the Atlas. And it describes the importance of those values and how they relate to local government policies and actions. And I did this, as I mentioned, a table on the federal and provincial legislations that govern local government, environment, and climate actions. And then there's an inventory of the local government regulatory and non-regulatory tools like OCPs, the official community plans, environmental development permit areas, and so on. And they're examples of policy provisions. And we tried where we could to provide performance targets for those policies and indicators that are currently in use or that we recommend are in use for local governments so they can measure how well they're doing. And it's really intended mainly for planners and policymakers, but anybody can use it. So a couple of examples here, and I'm actually going to I'll flip over to the document in a sec, but table 8 really is the key. It's this is a summary of the official community plans that I explored throughout the project area. And we've more or less sorted them by theme, which roughly map to the environmental policies. And I'm just going to switch over. Can you guys see that? That's table 8. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So you'll see here they're divided up more into themes because the policy by local government, they don't necessarily directly map to the environmental values that are written out in the Atlas and on the website. So we sorted them by theme, and then you'll see there's a policy statement here, and generally that's either been lifted directly or somewhat adapted from an existing OCP. So for example, you'll see here there's City of Courtenay, their official community plan, and it actually provides the page number and the reference to where that policy statement came from. And wherever this was possible, I've done this. And if there are examples of policy statements that we recommend that are not currently in use, and it's blank, it doesn't show anything in there, but there's still policy statements that we recommend local governments consider adopting. So just scroll through quickly here. And you can see over on the right where it makes sense to have them. We've got targets and indicators. So just saying, this is the goal that we are recommending you try to achieve. And so, for example, here, City of Surrey has a target goal of 40%. And the rest I can't read because the Zoom thing is over top of it, but you guys can read it. So I think this is really a key piece of the information. This is where the rubber hits the road in terms of here are the policy statements that we recommend you adopt. And I'll just go through some of the other themes, these environmentally sensitive areas. And again, policy statements, where they came from, and so on. Hydrologically sensitive areas, including wetlands and marine areas, and so forth. Okay, so the other part I'm going to show you is another example from the toolkit is the biodiversity strategies table. And when we get to the questions section, we can always look at other pieces if you like. I'm just going to do this. Okay, so this is a summary of all of the existing tools that I explored in the toolkit, both for First Nations and local government, and it gives a brief description of them. And then, insofar as it's possible, I've indicated which of the environmental values they apply to. So not all of these resources, all of these policies. And the policies, I should say, include legislation, regulations, BMPs, and so on. Not all of them directly map to all of the layers, but in most cases, they do. And actually, I just confused you guys because I'm not talking about the biodiversity strategies. So I'm just going to scroll down to that table. So you can see why this document's so long. There's a lot here. So here we go. Here's Appendix C, which is, again, policy statements that have been used in various biodiversity strategies, which is another tool local governments can use. And so the statement, the theme that they fall under, where the statement came from, and where it makes sense, or where there is one, what the indicator is, and what the target is for achieving those goals. So that goes on for several pages. And that's it for me, short and sweet. We can come back to other sections if people want to see them.
Thank you so much. Yes, big round of applause for Marian and all of our presenters. Lots of information. And just so you know, we're going to go through to questions now. And Stephanie has kindly offered, if there's things that we don't address or we don't have time to today, you can reach out directly to Stephanie Woods and she can help hopefully answer any questions that we don't get to, or maybe that you don't have a chance to answer. So there was some questions, Kelly, that you have already started to address related to mapping. Is there anything that you wanted to speak to on that you didn't answer already in the chat?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the slide we put up showing the terrestrial ecosystem mapping projects that we've merged, it didn't include separate SCI projects, so it was missing the Metrovan SCI, the Bowen Islands Trust, but those we're building all those into our merge layers, so not to worry. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. And on that theme, also to you, Kelly, would love to learn. So Raphael saying, is there a way to learn about identifying wetland recruitment areas? And yeah, if this is getting quite detailed, then of course we can talk offline.
This is something we're looking at. I mean, we've got, at the moment, we're just focused on getting these draft layers online in a beta format. But yeah, we think we have been, and I didn't mention it in the presentation, we've been working with Lillian Ma from UBC and Alison Haney, and we're developing sort of a refined and merged riparian area, which is also includes the Nature Trust of BC's topo riparian mapping. So whereas the ecosystem mapping shows where the riparian ecosystems are, so if it's been developed, it doesn't, or cleared, it may not show up in that mapping. But the topo riparian mapping basically takes topography and uses some algorithm along with the streamline to show you where it's like predicts where riparian habitat or ecosystems should occur. So we're looking at maybe overlapping Louise Marr's forest cover map with the topo riparian mapping. to show us, to give us as an analog showing where do we have forest cover in these riparian zones and where we don't. In the areas where we don't have forest cover, or if we don't have, maybe just very small trees or young trees, those could be, yeah, we're thinking that that might be a way to help us identify priority areas for riparian restoration, if that answers your
Yeah.
question. But we probably won't be looking at that this fiscal.
Yeah, and maybe off point, but for folks to know, there's a provincial wetland project that's also underway. So Marian knows well. So, stay tuned. And of course, it's a big exercise, but it's a known important area of work.
Yeah, and I'm just going to mention that, we're, in terms of wetlands, we're not generating any new mapping. We're just merging and aggregating data, recognizing that both the province and the feds are working on a bunch of new wetland mapping. So when that data is ready, we'll be building it into the atlas. So
Amazing. Housekeeping item from Pamela. Yes, slides. So it's recorded. This call's recorded. Kelly, you said specific slides are available. So maybe this
the
is a question.
presentation, I guess.
So
Well, yeah, do you need
oh,
slides specifically? 'Cause we can provide
I
those too.
guess, yeah, maybe Stephanie could
Yeah.
help
So
folks.
the webinar video recording will be on our website. I posted the link in the chat there. We can also link it to the Action for Adaptation website when it's launched in March. If you'd like a copy of the actual presentation, I can send it by PDF. Just shoot me an email.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. And Kelly, another question about intertidal zone, and you kind of answered that already.
Yeah, so we will be including sensitive intertidal areas where the data is available. It's not available consistently across the study area, but where it is, we'll be incorporating it.
Okay. And then Pamela, and if anybody wants to chat, please, you can put up your hand or unmute yourself. And so there was a question from Pamela, or maybe a point. Did you want to speak to that, Pamela, or do you want me to read it out? I can read it out. So the one thing to be aware of is that most or all of municipalities are updating their OCPs right now, including Surrey. And Surrey's new OCP is likely to be finalized and published in the new year. So our canopy cover target is now aligned with the Urban Forest Management Strategy of 2023, which is 30%, no longer 40 like Metro Vancouver's target. Interesting. Thanks for sharing. Okay, access. I'm just zooming through. Posting of things. Patricia, is there anything you wanted to speak to?
Sorry, I was just unmuting.
No
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah. One of my questions was just that one of the challenges is that municipal departments sometimes work in silos. So would you recommend that planning, engineering, and parks departments all work together to incorporate these policy statements?
Marian?
Yeah, and it's a good point, and absolutely agree. I heard that a lot, and it is a recommendation. It's in the policy toolkit that's pretty essential. It's discussed in part 1 of the toolkit with a diagram.
I think it's a common,
Yeah.
doesn't matter what level of government or even agency.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing challenge, though. Good to note. And then Dionne, did you want to talk about the LiDAR mapping update? It looks like you answered it, but
Maybe I can answer that for Dionne.
sure.
We've been speaking to the province, and they are planning to have wall-to-wall LiDAR coverage eventually for the province, but we don't know when that's going to be. However, we have means of updating our forest cover map even without the LiDAR, because we can use AI and satellite and remote sensing. We've already done that because we've basically updated any of our forest cover mapping from 2019 LiDAR and use satellite imagery to detect change between now and then to create a new recent cut block or clearing mapping layer that we then use to update our forest cover mapping. So this is our little workaround until we have full LiDAR coverage. And the province doesn't know when they're going to have that. So yeah.
Apologies. nothing to do with me, but on behalf of,
Yeah.
I know it's been an ongoing problem or need. And then Patricia, you just commented, yeah, if there's some way to get some of the policy toolkit Marian's put together sooner than March. So Stephanie or Dionne, did you want to speak to that? The ability to access it before March?
Yeah, I just wrote, put in our email. So if you email us, we can send you the draft version if it's going to help you with your OCP planning and things that are underway.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then Kelly Laurie is just asking about the resolution of LiDAR.
Sorry, what was the specific question?
Just do you know about the resolution that the province's LiDAR
I
will
think it's
be?
1 meter. It's very fine. It ends up, when we're generating map products from the LiDAR, you don't necessarily want to go down to that level because when you interpret the data, you can generate a lot of inaccuracies. We're finding that with even our 3-meter land cover. Anyways, but it is very high resolution. It just sort of depends on how high resolution you want your map products to be, which is also a lot of processing power and time, and makes maps difficult to upload and download. So
Yeah, thanks, Kelly.
I also wanted to mention with respect to the comment about the OCPs, that a lot of them a lot of local governments are updating their OCPs now. We're aware of that, and we've been running as fast as we can with this project, but we are a small team, and we are trying, but we're unfortunately the timing was a little bit off in terms of getting these products out, but where we can.
You've done well,
we're
yeah.
trying, yeah.
And then, yeah, just a note about Marian, it looks like you've answered Claire's question about the land code specific tools.
Yeah. Yeah, and Dionne.
Yeah, you
Dionne
both
actually
on
answered
top of
the
it.
question.
Yay. Oh yeah, Hannah, please go ahead.
Hi, first of all, I just want to say this was an incredibly fascinating presentation, and this atlas and toolkit I think is going to be so useful to our work. I work for the Sunshine Coast Conservation Association, so it was great to see the local examples as well. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'd love to know a little bit more about the plans for ecosystem connectivity mapping that you have coming up in 2026, like very briefly, if that's possible.
Well, part of the reason why we've delayed it was, one, it didn't make sense to start doing it till we had all these other layers complete. And the other reason was the province is actually working on a ecological connectivity mapping layer, like province-wide, which will cover our area. So we're waiting to see what they come up with. There's a number of different methodologies you can use for ecological connectivity mapping. And we want to, if it makes sense, we want to try, if the province isn't doing it for our area, or if it's at a different resolution, we'd still like to try and align our methods with theirs. So we're not sure which way we're going to go with that, but we've been doing a lot of research on it. And then I think the question, Lori's question about the LiDAR, the province's LiDAR, I think it's a 2-meter resolution digital elevation model is
Right,
what the LiDAR is. So yeah.
Thanks. And Pamela. Yeah.
Sorry, bit of a lag there.
That's okay.
So I just anticipated this for so long since things got started so many years ago. So I'm just like waiting now to see all of this come online, and the document. Not faulting you, obviously, with the OCP stuff. We got thrown into that mess because of provincial housing mandates. That's what really kind of spurred a lot of that. Although many of us were overdue with updates to our OCP. The siloing issue that was mentioned before, that is a huge thing. Are there any plans to do engagement on this, to actually come to prospective audiences and users to make this known? I mean, I can email stuff and say, hey, everybody, this is really cool. It's been worked on for the last few years and it's finally available. We should be using it. Certainly Metro Vancouver, like Lori is going to be touting this, but for those of us that don't necessarily have a prominent voice in our organization, or we're dealing with a lot of pushback on the environmental side, that I think having the ability to get this on the radar of mayor and council and senior management is going to be essential I'm just not sure. Are you just hoping it's going to like organically disseminate and it'll have a trickle down effect, or is there any support or capacity to do more targeted engagement on this?
Who would like to answer that?
I think that's a Dionne answer, but I can say something too, but I'll let Dionne go first.
Yeah, I guess once the atlas is out and online, we're definitely planning to do that and really seeking your help to help us arrange those meetings with local governments and First Nations in the region to kind of help you look through the tool, make sure it meets your needs, answer any questions that may arise, kind of showcase the tool and how it could be applied to different departments within your organizations. And we for the ecosystem mapping, we did a pilot in the Sunshine Coast and have already been working with the Sunshine Coast Regional District to kind of share the mapping we have, presenting to the board members. So we've already started a little bit on that work, and it's been met with a very good reception, which we're very grateful for, and hoping to continue that. So it would be great. Please reach out to us and email us anytime and say, would you come and kind of talk to us, and we're happy to do that. Marian?
It's I can't speak to the engagement part, but and Pam, I think even in speaking with you, I understand the frustration that staff have that we can provide all of the good policy statements in the world, but it really takes the political will at the mayor and council level and senior management in local governments to stand behind the policy and not cave, even in given the lack of provincial legislation to provide teeth. Sorry, Lynn. To provide teeth to some of the policies that we're recommending. But I will say the Local Government Act does give local governments the authority to enact environmental policy and even and bylaws, enforceable bylaws. So again, I'm not a lawyer, but I feel like all the tools are there. It just requires collaboration within the local government and the willingness to actually follow through. So I know it's frustrating for staff because staff know the right ideas, and there's always that pushback from community, from the development community, and so on. So I don't have answers for you, but if presenting to mayor and council is a solution, then it's a good idea.
I just wanted to add on a little bit to what Dionne mentioned is because the pilot was developed in the Sunshine Coast, and Dionne mentioned that the SCRD is already using some of those mapping layers in their natural assets inventory, but also Tla'amin First Nation within that area is using it as well in their planning processes. So they're just a little bit ahead of the rest of the study area, but that's the next steps for the rollout of the remaining areas.
And they're also using draft maps, which are, they're a little cumbersome and they're not as fully updated and easy to use, but they will be hopefully by the time they're at the beta stage. So.
I think the level of the resolution and the level of detail and the currency of the data that's being used for the maps is a really good case that can be made at the mayor and council level. Say, hey, we've got this information, we've got this data, we can show it to you, it's current. So here you go.
It's valid. We are losing some folks to time, and we are a little bit over time, which we kind of anticipated. So thanks for those of you who've stuck with us. We can probably stop the recording now. And just a reminder, if any of you didn't get your question answered, or if you think of one later, please reach out to Stephanie.